folks. This is Walter. Chris just left us. He just jumped out for a second here. So I'm going to bring Jeff in, and I'm going to have Jeff kind of speak to y'all and talk about his latest article that was in a Substack. I apologize about my hair. I wasn't actually anticipating to be on screen today. So, there he is. Chris, come save the day.
Yeah, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. That's what you get when you try and use Microsoft Edge instead of Google Chrome, I guess. Well, hey, Jeff, how's it going?
I'm great, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing well. I hear you have some interesting conspiracy facts about the current wildfire situation in Alberta.
Well, I wouldn't even say that they're conspiracy facts. I mean, or anything to do with a conspiracy. I mean, I just think it's really interesting that we had Skippy bleeding in the House of Commons last week about forest fires and climate change and screaming at Pierre Poilievre about Canada's burning and forest fires are caused by climate change and we have a plan to end climate change. All the typical crazy Justin Trudeau histrionics. And of course, my view of the world was that it's because Justin Trudeau obviously hadn't been reading, all of the newspaper articles about all of the people in Alberta and British Columbia that have been charged with arson in relation to lighting our forests on fire.
Well, of course, that gets swept under the rug because it doesn't fit the narrative, right?
Well, that's the problem. And I mean, since I've written the article, it's been or the Substack, it's been kind of interesting because I've been getting every day somebody sends me a new newspaper article from, a lot of it from mainstream media, talking about people being arrested in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, police investigations in Quebec and Nova Scotia with regard to forest fire arsons, right? Where you've got all these crazy people running around literally lighting the forests on fire or trying to light, the most recent one I saw was the RCMP in and around Drumheller are looking for some idiot that was wandering around driving up and down the ditches on Highway 9 with a can of gasoline, lighting the ditches on fire, trying to start grass fires. So,
Unreal.
It's complete insanity. And we've got all these, lunatics screaming about climate change. When, we've got, women, a woman near Kamloops lighting forest fires. We had a woman near Sook lighting forest fires. We had a woman in the Lakeland district of Alberta near Glendon who, lit 31 forest fires. And I mean, the same woman in Alberta that lit 31 forest fires this year was charged with lighting 32 forest fires last year. And it seems, like what I would like to know is, and I'd like to hear from the police, and I'd like an investigation into, is what's the motivation of these people? Is the motivation actually to light our forests on fire so that Skippy can stand up in the House of Commons and scream and yell about climate change? I mean,
that's exactly it. When your woke ideology and your backwards worldview on climate is so trashed by real facts, you have to create new facts in order to support your opinions. And that's exactly what's going on here. And I'm not saying that all of these fires have been started. I'm sure quite a few have been, as we've seen in the past. But in addition to that, Jeff, if you look across history, there's forest fires all the time. It's nature's way of cleaning up old forests. And there's records of it in old growth forests where they do tree ring samplings. There's forest fires every single year almost. Across North America. So it's nothing new. But like you said, I mean, it's being used, this is being done for a purpose.
Well, and what's interesting to me, and I mean, and obviously let's start with that. That's why I said I want to put this into the world of, conspiracy theories, conspiracy facts. I mean, there's a lot of forest fires in Alberta, like more than half of them. And I've spoken to, I have very, very senior, sources within the Ministry of Forests. And I mean, they, clearly acknowledge that more than 50% of the forest fires in Alberta, are started by lightning. And of course, which is weather, not climate change, right? That we've had an especially challenging forest fire season this year because we're into an El Nino year, where, as we all know, we had an especially, dry and warm winter, where whatever snow, we would get snow and then the snow would melt and we got less precipitation than usual. And we had, extremely, dry conditions, through the winter, as a result of El Nino. Again, weather, not climate change, right? Where, and this is, like my sources in the Department of Forestry say, yeah, typically, you get a lightning strike. Things are, early in the year, April, May, things are still really moist from the snow melt. It might smolder for a day or two and then go out. But this year, because of the especially dry conditions, the winds would pick up something that would otherwise go out and turn it into a blaze. But what I see has been going on from all of the arson reports and so on is that there's been a deliberate attempt, in British Columbia, Alberta, and other jurisdictions in Canada to divert forestry resources from, fighting natural fires to go and fight fires that have been lit intentionally by, people that are trying to
terrorists
agenda, and nothing's being done. Nothing's been, is being pursued in that regard. Although I am thrilled to hear that Danielle Smith is going to have a full investigation into the forest fire arsons in Alberta, and work at dispelling this myth that these forest fires are somehow caused by climate change as opposed to weather, and people that are deliberately lighting fires to divert forestry resources from fires.
Yeah, and there's historical record of massive fires sweeping across North America. I mean, as long as we have been keeping records, there's records of droughts that are so bad it peeled off the topsoil from 50% of the Midwest United States. Like, this was a serious problem, and it wasn't because we had a whole bunch of people on the planet. It wasn't because we were burning tons of hydrocarbons. It was because the climate was changing in natural cycles as it's done for thousands of years. But now we have politicians who are using this as an opportunity to get in our pockets. So if Trudeau's saying, these forest fires are being caused by climate change and we really have to act faster, maybe we need to double our carbon tax. Maybe we need to make fuel more expensive and accelerate the murder of the internal combustion engine. That's what's happening here. And it's opportunistic thugs using normal world events in order to advance their goals. Plain and simple.
Well, and the other thing is, and I've written about this extensively, and I've done quite a bit of research, into this. And I mean, I'm obviously not the only one that thinks this way. I mean, there's lots of people that have been writing about this, and and saying that the so-called 97% of scientists who agree that we're experiencing man-made climate change. Well, let's be really clear: 97% or 99% of those 97%, of so-called scientists who say that climate change is man-made, are scientists that are on the payroll of various governments, that have literally perverted public policy to, use weather as an excuse for sticking their hands in people's pockets. Like, I have friends in Alberta that have forwarded me their home heating bills that have literally doubled. Their natural gas bills have doubled as a result of, Trudeau's carbon tax. And again, it's just another reason, to my way of thinking, as to why Alberta would be so much better off outside of the jurisdiction of the Canadian federal government. Because these taxes are not only nonsensical, but they're punitive against Albertans, because we need to heat our homes with natural gas. We don't have huge hydroelectric resources like they do in British Columbia or Quebec or Ontario, where they literally subsidize people's electric bills, and they can actually, in lots of places in BC, can heat their homes with electricity and be subsidized by the government with regard to their home heating costs. I mean, I think the government of Canada, if they wanted to be fair, and there's lots of people that have written about this, should look at how much land was taken, has been destroyed by these huge reservoirs, and how many trees have been taken away from absorbing CO2 and producing oxygen, and and applying punitive taxes for that. Because I mean, let's face it. I mean, hydroelectricity isn't carbon neutral. Everything has a carbon cost. So let's stop pretending that any of this makes any sense. The other thing that I want people to really internalize is the fact that Canada's total carbon emissions are such a minuscule proportion of the total global carbon, total global carbon output, that literally China and India, that increase the amount of carbon that they put out every year by 10 times Canada's total output. So if we were to completely eliminate Canada's carbon output tomorrow, it wouldn't make any difference whatsoever to so-called global, man-made climate change, if it was even happening, given the degree to which China and India are growing their economies at the expense of working Canadians. So working Canadians are getting hammered on a regular basis by, Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh. Thank God Rachel Notley didn't get elected, because she would have been right in there, just sticking it to working Albertans over something completely nonsensical. Any carbon reductions in Canada are pure, are symbolic, because the amount that China and India increase their carbon outputs every year dwarf any savings that we make in Canada. So, this is what people really need to internalize on this topic. And I guess, let's figure out, how much carbon has now been put into the atmosphere by all the lefties that have been running around lighting Canada's forests on fire.
Of course.
It's mind-boggling.
And let's zoom out a little bit and look at this from another perspective. If you want to, you mentioned that the carbon tax is punitive towards the little guy, and it absolutely is. My bills have doubled at the Whistle Stop Cafe since I took the place over. My power bill's out of control. My gas bill's out of control, which translates into increased cost on the menu because everything costs more. So you're right. It is punitive towards the lower and middle class. And some people might be saying, well, what do you mean? The government is penalizing large emitters. And that's completely false. What's happening is the government is taking money in the form of a tax, this carbon tax. They're taxing us on the air that we exhale or the energy we use. And they're putting that money into the government. And then they're giving their big, wealthy buddies, like big oil company giants, billions of dollars to invest in green initiatives like carbon capture. So carbon capture and storage, these big oil companies are buying virtue by starting this carbon capture and injection, pressurizing their reservoirs and creating and producing more oil and gas and getting more wealthy, all on the backs of every single Albertan who is paying that carbon tax. So it's not, this isn't it's not a cut and dry thing, and there's way more to it than meets the eye if you dig into it a little bit. And this whole thing with the forest fire and the arson and all that is supporting these ridiculous initiatives that do nothing but reduce our prosperity. And it's my opinion that we need to start getting this truth out. Like, for instance, the Alberta Prosperity Project, we're trying to bring these truths out and getting people back to a path where we're actually pursuing prosperity instead of this fake virtue based on flawed ideology and science.
Well, one of the things that I'm really happy about with, Premier Smith talking about initiating an investigation into the forest fire arsons in Alberta is that, I think we should be encouraging, Premier Smith and our new Attorney General, Mickey Amery, to be looking at, applying the Infrastructure Act, the Critical Infrastructure Act against forest arsonists, right? And, anybody that wants to burn our forests down and they get caught burning our forests down, like that crazy woman in Lakeland County that's now been charged again with 31 forest arsons, right? Why isn't she being charged under the Critical Infrastructure Act and facing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fines for, endangering, the lives of all of her fellow citizens and shutting down critical infrastructure in the province with the forest fire she's lit? I mean, I think that these people should not only face serious criminal penalties, and quite frankly, my view is if somebody's out intentionally lighting a forest on fire, let's be real here. Let's not charge them with arson or mischief or some of the other things that that they can plead down to. Let's
How
start
about
charging.
terrorism?
No, or attempted murder.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
like the lives that they're putting at risk, the homes that they're putting at risk, and then and then on top of it, I mean, let's look at the amount of like we're so worried about carbon. Let's look at the amount of carbon that these crazy these lunatics are releasing into the atmosphere. Let's assess these forest arsonists with carbon taxes and have them pay millions of dollars for all the carbon that they've released into the world by lighting forests on fire, and start seizing their homes and seizing their cars and seizing their property and all of those types of things, right? As a justifiable penalty for lighting a forest on fire. This is these are the types of things that I think that we need to start doing and get the message out that that these people are going to be are going to be treated seriously. I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that I've seen in the last several weeks since in the last week since I've written that Substack, has been pretty mind-boggling. Including some of the Google Earth footage and things people have been posting online about how forest fires in Alberta and Quebec, we're all starting simultaneously, in these jurisdictions. It really looks like there's been an organized effort to, create, an out of control situation so that, I guess COVID's over, they need a new crisis. They're not going to convince everybody that, what Theresa Tam is saying, that climate change is the #1 health risk in Canada. Without finding a way to, to underline, to underline it. So I guess if everybody's choking on forest fire smoke, that let Skippy and the rest of them stand up and scream about, how we need to be in a state of emergency because of the climate. And I guess that's how they're going to justify the climate lockdowns that we all know are coming.
Right in the I can't remember what it's called, but it's the Communist Playbook. It's the instruction manual on, and I think it was Karl Marx had a lot to do with this book. It's an instruction manual on how to implement communism in a society. And one of the things is create chaos. Chaos is a necessary precursor to installing communism, because then you can say, well, give us your rights, give us your freedoms, and we will keep you safe from things like forest fires. So there's a lot more to this than people think. Now, can you see the question on the screen there, Jeff?
Yeah, and actually, I was just about to jump in and say that one of our viewers, Easton Conroy, has posted a great question, which is, why is the government and unions blocking farmers, truckers, graders, construction from getting in to save animals, create fire breaks, etc.? This is insane. It's as if they want everything to burn. If they sign a waiver, let them in. Well, again, I'm not going to divulge my sources, but I've spoken to people very, very senior within the forestry department, and at a senior ministerial level, my understanding is that that Minister Lowen has been working very, very hard to to fix all of those problems. But let's be really clear here. The big problem is that and again, this is something that Danielle Smith needs to address, is that the bureaucracy right now is just stuffed full of NDP appointees that are leftovers. That are leftovers from the last time Rachel Notley was busy trying to ruin this province. And it's all of those types of people that are, literally, oh no, you can't do this, you can't do that. Oh, well, we better let things burn because that's a non-unionized piece of equipment that's going in there to put out that fire. So, my understanding is that Minister Lowen's been working really hard to dispense with that idiocy. I understand that he was working very hard to change the rules and regulations in and around that and expedite the approval process so that oil field equipment could be quickly, mobilized and moved in to create fire breaks and fight the fires. But you've got to know that the idiotic NDP bureaucrats, were fighting him tooth and nail the entire way. The other thing is that, when the NDP were in power, and this is why, you really have to ask yourself how accidental these forest fires were and whether or not NDP supporters were the ones that were out lighting them. When Rachel was last in government, they passed they amended the Emergencies Act so that if there's an emergency that broke out and things needed to be done within a writ period, that no government ministers could actually go into work And if they did, they were going to be fined under the Elections Act, for going to work during an emergency during the writ period. The idea is that you're supposed to turn everything over to the bureaucrats, who literally would have let everything burn if Todd Lowen hadn't been going into work every day, kicking ass and taking names. And he was meeting with resistance all the way along. And I think the issue of whether or not they're going to be coming after him and trying to fine him $4,000 a day, for trying to save Alberta's forests and trying to save Alberta farms and homes. Whether that's going to remain a live issue or not. I suspect there might have to be a retroactive legislative amendment to clean that level of stupidity up. But it was pretty shocking to me during the election that that NDP bureaucrats were trying to keep people from going into work to help organize an effective response to the forest fires, which was the fires that was busily being botched by NDP bureaucrats in the middle of that crisis.
Phone's ringing. So you've said it a couple times, and I've said it in previous live stream. The problem, folks, is not necessarily your elected representatives in the government that's causing these problems. It's the bureaucracy behind them that stays there from election to election. I think a lot of times our elected representatives, they get into office and they think they're going to do all these great things, and then they kind of look behind the curtain and they're like, oh crap, this is a terrible mess of bureaucracy. How are we going to deal with this? And so, the UCP they campaigned on red tape reduction quite a while ago, and I think they've only done a little bit of it. And if you don't believe me, try and run a business and see what red tape there is. But this is something that needs to be addressed. The government has to handle on this bureaucracy problem.
I personally believe that we need to. And AHS is probably the perfect organization to start with, right? That with regard to the bureaucracy in Alberta, we should start applying the Roman practice of decimation. So that's just randomly get rid of 1 in 10 of them, right? And you start doing it annually, right, to reduce the size of the bureaucracy in Alberta. I mean, like AHS as an example, as a perfect example, is one of the most incompetently run organizations, in the province. Like during the during the COVID pandemic, I was literally reviewing, publicly filed affidavits where they're saying, oh, well, we can fire Dr. Joanna Moser, or lay her off because she won't get vaccinated, a board certified anesthesiologist, and that's not going to affect our operations one bit. Well, the same people that were swearing affidavits claiming that, that they could easily get rid of Joanna Moser, who was a true COVID hero. I mean, this woman, couldn't get vaccinated because she's deathly allergic to vaccines. Last time she had one, she went into anaphylactic shock. This is all part of the public record, so I'm not giving away any secrets here. So she, did not want to be vaccinated out of fear for her life, which was justified. And they're going, oh, well, it doesn't matter, you're gone. And then when and then they file affidavits saying, oh, we're not going to miss her anyway, we can operate easily without her. The very day that Joanna was laid off, they had to put Red Deer General Hospital on diversion and fly trauma cases to Calgary or Edmonton because they had a shortage of anesthesiologists and couldn't do any major trauma surgeries without Joanna Moser. Yet the idiots from AHS were swearing affidavits saying, oh yeah, it's like we don't need these filthy, unvaccinated people, continuing to work, tirelessly as they have throughout COVID. We're going to be fine without them. And then they're having to shut down multi-billion-dollar hospitals because they found that they couldn't operate without them. So, when Danielle Smith, fired the board of AHS, good start. But the real problem is are the executive ranks, and they need to go in there and clean house. Anybody that was on the scientific advisory group that spent all of COVID misadvising, Dina Hinshaw, they should all be fired. All of the senior management that were supporting, the layoffs of doctors in the middle of what was supposed to be a public health emergency, they all need to be laid off. There needs to be accountability they all need to be fired. I mean, there needs to be accountability in the bureaucracy And every time a bureaucrat does something idiotic, like telling the Minister of Forests that he can't have oil field equipment going in to build fire breaks or help put out forest fires or whatever, those people need to be identified and fired immediately. And they need to be immediately sacked without pay, and then just let the lawyers sort it out, with the unions thereafter. I mean, enough is enough.
There's more that can be done. As an oil field worker, as a supervisor, if I am negligent in my duty to ensure the health and safety of my workers, and there's an incident, somebody gets hurt, I get charged. And some of these bureaucrats, if they're doing those things and making those decisions, and they're causing harm and death to the people of Alberta, they should be charged under the same criminal code. I mean, this has been around for 15 years now that supervisors have to do that. And what's different if you're supervising the entire province?
Well, and unfortunately, making out criminal charges against bureaucrats is exceedingly difficult. But certainly, these people need to be held accountable and they need to be fired. I mean, I was having a discussion with an old friend of mine today, and he was, lamenting the fact that Travis Taves was no longer in government. And I told him, I said, from my perspective, I was thrilled to see Taves, take his ball and go home. He did so much, as as a business owner in this province. Travis Taves, as finance minister, deliberately decided to shut down businesses, or to support Dina Hinshaw shutting down businesses in this province. And the finance department, under Taves' so-called leadership, deliberately decided not to fully compensate businesses for their losses as a result of the completely needless lockdowns. So in effect, Travis Taves, as Minister of Finance in this province, personally decided that businesses like yours were going to bear the brunt of COVID, while Walmart and all the big multinational corporations continue to operate as if COVID didn't exist. They're going to bankrupt businesses across the province, and Taves was deliberately not going to compensate them for damage done to them by the government. And and as we all know, the destruction of mom and pop businesses, the destruction of mom and pop restaurants, on and on. All that's done is put money into the hands of multinational chain stores and franchise stores, at the expense of mom and pop businesses that could not bear the brunt of Dina. Well, it wasn't Dina. We all know it wasn't Dina Hinshaw's lockdowns, but it was the Jason Kenney cocktail cabinet lockdowns. That ended up going bankrupt. And and the suicides in this province went through the roof, and all the rest of it, all as a result of Travis Taves' bloody-minded decisions. So when anybody tells me that, it's really sad that we lost Travis Taves because we needed to have some adults in the room, Travis Taves wasn't an adult in the room. Travis Taves was a toxic mess who deliberately, for his own petty reasons, decided to literally murder businesses in this province. With his just absolutely asinine policy decisions supported by
big time.
What's that?
He dropped the ball big time.
Well, he didn't drop the ball. He deliberately decided to murder businesses like yours, Chris. I mean, it's not a question of dropping the ball. This was willful. What he did was willful. This wasn't just negligence. It was intentional. And that's to be addressed.
It's okay because they gave us $60,000 loans that we could pay back later when we still can't afford to pay it back. So it's all good, right? I like what you said about, you mentioned how the Premier fired the board of AHS. And the image I had of her doing that was her in her yard cutting the tops off dandelions to fix the dandelion problem. Now, what happens when we cut the tops off the dandelions? The next day they pop back up and they're just as tall as when we cut them. That's what's occurred within AHS right now by removing the board. And I agree with you 100%. We need to get that root, those rotten roots out of there. And we need to replace it with people that actually have the interests of the province at heart, not the interests of the union, not the interests of a politician, but the interests of the people of Alberta. And until we do that, we're really not going to see the changes that we need. So hopefully the Premier follows through on her on her campaign promises to clean that up.
Well, but the problem, I think the problem is that we still As much as I think that Premier Smith is a breath of fresh air, there's still a lot of toxicity in and around her, and oh, you can't do that because oh my goodness, if you do that, caucus is going to walk out on you. You're going to have a caucus revolt, and oh, you got to let Jason Nixon into cabinet and give him a cabinet position because the progressives will be really upset if you don't. Well, give me a break. Jason Nixon's not a progressive. I mean, Jason Nixon was a Kenny sycophant, right? Like, who literally fought, the leadership review tooth and nail. Obviously did not support Danielle's leadership. Was likely involved with a cabal of MLAs, thankfully a number of whom have been turfed, and were quietly running around telling people, don't worry. Once we get elected, we'll get rid of her, right? So, as far as I'm concerned, Nixon's, as a holdover. For whatever reason, Danielle thought that he needed, I guess, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, that he needed to be in cabinet. But, I'm still of the view that, people, toxic individuals like that can do far less damage in the backbenches, than they can having a ministerial position, and the ability to, dispense patronage and control, billion-dollar budgets, when they're barely qualified to operate a car.
I've was wondered about that too when I saw the cabinet appointments, and then I started thinking, the premier, she's a very intelligent person. She's very sharp. She's got piles of experience in education, these types of things, and it just occurred to me that if she's appointed Nixon to that cabinet position, there must be a reason. And although I'm not a Jason Nixon fan at all, I know that even though I think he's I don't think he's a great person for Alberta, a politician for Alberta. I'm sure maybe he's got some qualities that the premier is exploiting for that position. I don't know. I wish it went differently, but this is the way it is. Now I'm gonna bring this back to the arsons and the wildfires in Alberta. We've talked a little bit about how these things are affecting the premier and her plan for Alberta, what she wants to do. Do you think that these arsons in some way could impact the plans that the premier has to get this province back on track?
Well, I personally, again, and I've said it earlier, I'm very happy that she's going to have, conduct an investigation into the number of arsons, forest fire arsons in Alberta during this year's, fire season, and also look at the degree to which all these forest fire arsons have diverted forestry resources, away from, fighting, actual wildfires that were, started by lightning or something else. I mean, when you look at the pattern of fires and that were simultaneously ignited in this province, and the fact that, we're now seeing all of these arson charges being brought, where it's clear that people, were deliberately lighting our forests on fire. It's clear, I think there's a real clear question to me as to whether or not this was all part of the NDP campaign strategy. One of the things that I was, that I was laughing about was that, when you're looking at this is, Tim Caulfield, Trudeau's, so-called misinformation expert, who got an Order of Canada, for suggesting that anybody who thought that vaccines were anything other than safe and effective, was a right-wing conspiracy theorist. Tim Caulfield decided that he needed to come out from his COVID bunker and start writing and speaking about the fact that anybody that would suggest that the forest fire problem was man-made, was a misinformationist and conspiracy theorist and all the rest of it. And of course, my line to friends of mine was that, if Caulfield's on the subject and if Caulfield's saying it's misinformation and a conspiracy theory, you got to know that there's a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, I agree.
His track record on the subject has been pretty abysmal, right? And I know I've been digressing and going back and forth on the COVID topic, but let's not forget that the same people that brought us COVID lockdowns and all the COVID hysteria and all the fear porn in and around COVID are the same ones that are, trying to generate fear porn in and around forest fires and climate change, right? So, I really see that, all the usual suspects, let's say, are involved on the other side of this debate.
There was a question that came up, and I want to just touch on it real quick. Walter, if you could put it up, it's a question from Norm Leenstra. I'll just read it. It says, now this is kind of an aside to what we're talking about. It says, how large is the independence movement in Alberta, there it is, as a percentage? And while I can't answer that with an exact figure, because obviously we don't have current polling to show that, what I can tell you is that, in my opinion, if the message that the APP, the Alberta Prosperity Project, is the message that they're sending, if that is put to a room of 100 Albertans, a minimum of 80% of them would be on board. So while right now I don't believe that we have a huge percentage of the province that believes in independence, once they hear the message and the rationale, that changes very, very quickly. I mean, Jeff, how many meetings have we spoken at where we ask in the beginning how many people have memberships and believe in the idea of independence, and half put up their hands? We finish delivering our message and we lay out the facts, the real facts, and we ask the same question, and almost the entire room is on board. That's why these things are important.
And I'm glad somebody asked that question, because I think one of the big things that we need to address, as an organization, and this is the direction that I want to see APP moving into, is advocating, better public education in our schools and in our curriculum. Like, I would like to see a course taught on, Canadian fiscal federalism, so that kids, in grade school, can be taught from an early age how badly Alberta has been mistreated since the outset of Confederation. Like, we live in a province where, our culture involves around getting up early, going to work, working hard to feed our families, and working hard to support our friends and neighbors. And as a result, we've created, a thriving, vibrant economy. And what people, need to internalize is the fact that if Alberta declared independence tomorrow, we would be the country in the world with the largest GDP per capita of any country in the world, right? But instead, all of our resources are being siphoned out of the province. They're being, sent to Quebec so that Quebec can have a balanced budget, while Alberta continues to run, deficits and is still working, is working to pay off our debt that has been incurred because of all of the money that's literally, as far as I'm concerned, been stolen from us through transfer payments and siphoned into Quebec, whose entire finance department literally revolves around continuing to make Quebec a have-not province. So, Albertans need to ask themselves a question and maybe wake up and smell a coffee on this subject. But how is it that Quebec can be a have-not province when it has a surplus budget and virtually no debt? I mean, it's complete insanity to me that Albertans are continuing to subsidize, the fiscal strength of Quebec, while we're continually, having to deal with debts and deficits in this province, which would not exist, if we meaningfully address the transfer agreement problem.
Yeah.
We've had a referendum on the subject, but for whatever reason, the Kenney government wanted to do nothing about it, and hopefully, Danielle takes the bull by the horns and recognizes that is a mandate that she's duty bound to fulfill.
And I would say, I would go even further, and I would say, in order to fulfill that mandate, she needs some leverage. And what we're proposing with the Alberta Prosperity Project, with the referendum on independence, that is the leverage that we need as a province to do the kinds of things we're talking about, like fix equalization. We've been trying for years. It doesn't get done. Why? Because we don't have effective voices in the West. We want to not pay the carbon tax. We want to develop our resources, but we can't. Why? Because Ottawa won't let us. We don't have any leverage. If we had the leverage, we could do the things that Albertans want to be done.
Well, and the other thing is we need to start reimagining our finances and reimagining the way that we do our accounting, right? Like, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, have all completely cooked the books with regard to their hydro resources. So, they basically say, okay, the water is the resource, and I can't remember the exact amounts, but it's laughable. But let's call it a penny per acre foot of water, or 1,000 acre feet of water going over a dam. That's the resource. But they say, oh, okay, well, all of the, but all the money generated by our hydro corporations, that's exempt from transfer payments because under the system, that's Crown Corporation income, and it's not resource revenue. So, I mean, we can easily do the same thing in Alberta. Have it, Alberta institute tomorrow, a penny a barrel royalty on oil, a penny an MCF, on gas, and but on the condition that the companies that take advantage of those, royalty rates, invest in refining or LNG production or whatever in Alberta to refine or enhance the value of those products in Alberta, and get it in our heads that we're only going to start shipping, refined products out of the province. Like, we put condensate in pipelines all the time. In fact, all the bitumen pipelines, they run bitumen one way and condensate the other, to keep the pipelines there. There's no reason that you can't put gasoline or diesel into a pipeline. There's no reason that we can't fill, tanker cars with gasoline instead of and diesel instead of crude oil, right? And we get away from the whole Western Canadian select problem and the $20 a barrel that we're being paid less on our product, at the hubs in the United States, by telling people in the States, from now on, rather than shipping products to your refinery, you can be our sales agents, and you can sell our gasoline and diesel for us, but you're not refining our crude anymore. Because I think the goal of the Alberta government should be, to create the refinery capacity to refine every single barrel of oil produced in Alberta. I mean, the unions would love it. I mean, we'd be at full employment in overnight if that was what we were doing in terms of refinery construction. And people need to get their heads around it and start actually making these things happen, instead of just talking about it and listening to people that have a vested interest in the status quo because they own interests in refineries in China or wherever else. And, oh, well, where's your market for gasoline and diesel? Well, duh, right? Like, you're telling me if we refine every barrel of gasoline and diesel produced in Alberta, we're not going to have a ready market for it in the United States, and that the Americans wouldn't welcome us flooding their market with gasoline and diesel that would bring the prices down in the United States and help the American consumer? I doubt it.
I got two things. First one is, there's a reason why Saudi Arabia, the people there pay 25 cents a gallon or something ridiculous. It's because they do this, and they use, they benefit from the resource that they have in their country. Alberta could absolutely do the same. Second thing, Jeff, did you know that Quebec has all hell for abasement as well? They have huge natural gas reserves that are liquids rich, and they could actually be an energy almost superpower if they wanted to, if not for their ideological based policies that prevent hydraulic fracturing and extraction of gas. They could be, a gas giant in this country, but they just don't do it. And I think even Quebecers are starting to wake up and smell that coffee, which is nice.
Well, but again, it's this whole idea that somehow or other, that rather than having Canada thrive and become the richest, literally become one of the richest countries per capita in the world, that somehow or other, we've got to continually, repeatedly shoot ourselves in the foot with these stupid climate change policies that are really only designed to benefit, to primarily benefit China. So whenever I see the stuff about, Trudeau having been elected by the Chinese through Chinese electoral interference, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, that he pursues the policies that he pursues because the policies are pro-China. It's just like, Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden's owned lock, stock, and barrel by the communist Chinese. Is it any surprise that, that he's pursuing policies that are, that diminish and cripple the North American economy for the benefit of the Chinese? Of course not. So I just want to see there's a question posted on the screen from Marie Cameron, and it says, how or where does the leverage come from? And Marie, like, one of the things that we've been advocating, just to answer that question, through APP, is I personally believe that we need an Alberta, as an adjunct to the Alberta Sovereignty Act, that every 5 years we should have a referendum on sovereignty in the province of Alberta. It should become almost a constitutional, obligation it should become a constitutional obligation of the government of Alberta to ask Albertans as adults every 5 years whether we want to remain part of Canada or not. And that vote should coincide every time Trudeau unilaterally extends the transfer payment scheme, as far as I'm concerned. Because that's what we're dealing with here. I mean, the Sovereignty Act, gives us some leverage. As far as I'm concerned, it's, a little bit too soft to be meaningful. But, if we put in a statute that said every 5 years, Albertans are going to be polled on the issue of whether they want to remain part of Canada. And as an adjunct to that, we, insist that the provincial curriculum include lessons on how it is that Alberta is continually screwed on an ongoing basis by the current federal system, in the same way that they teach sovereignty in the schools in Quebec, nurturing the grievances of the Quebecois against the evil Canadian federal state. I would think that, literally within 5 or 10 years, we could have winning conditions for, an independence referendum in this province, and would see Alberta become one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
So what Jeff just said is the only leverage that Alberta could ever possibly have to negotiate better terms with the federal government is a successful referendum on independence, because that gives our government the mandate and the justification to approach the federal government and say, we either fix this, we fix our relationship, or we're out and we're going to chart our own course. What Jeff is saying is that Alberta should be asking the people every 4 or 5 years, do you want to live like this? Do you want to be part of this relationship? Are you happy with the terms of Confederation and how we're being treated within it? Do you feel like your voices are being heard in Ottawa? Do you feel like you're being allowed to prosper and live your life as your God intends? And if the answer is no, if people don't want to live like that under that kind of governance, we don't have to. That's the whole point of democracy. That's the whole point of freedom, is when the terms of the relationship with our governance are no longer appropriate for us, we have the right and the obligation to say no and change it. And that's the answer.
One of the most fundamentally important questions that any government should know the answer to in Alberta is whether or not Albertans want to remain part of Canada. And why is everybody so afraid with asking the question? I've had debates, public debates with Rob Anderson about this, and I've had discussions with Brian Jean about this. Over the years, it's it's like, Albertans aren't ready for it, and if we had a referendum, it wouldn't succeed. My point is, so what? I mean, I think every 4 or 5 years we should have a 90-day period where adults in Alberta get to debate whether or not we want to remain part of Canada, and given the way that we're continually treated by the Canadian federal government. And I don't care whether it's Poilievre that's in power or whether it's Justin Trudeau or whatever. I mean, the long and the short of it is the entire Canadian fiscal regime is set up to treat Alberta like a colony of Quebec and Ontario, and it's been to our detriment since this province was incorporated as a province in 1905.
And that was purposeful. That was done on purpose. Clifford Sifton actually said that was why Eastern Central Canada wanted Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC to join, specifically to enrich their lives in Central Canada. It's not a secret. It's always been out there.
Well, and there's no doubt about it. And I mean, thankfully, the biggest, and I think people, are very aware of it. I mean, the best thing that Alberta has going for it in terms of heading towards independence is Justin Trudeau. I mean, every time he opens his mouth, he creates another somebody else that wants to get the hell out of Canada. I mean, this week he's standing up and saying that any parent who thinks that they're they should have a say in mental health decisions involving their children, that parents have no business involving themselves in those decisions, that should be left to the teachers, and any parent who thinks they have the right to be involved in mental health decisions involving their kids is a right-wing extremist.
That was
right?
unreal.
So we have a government in Ottawa that's so out of touch with the average Canadian. And I mean, the recent polling is, I was reading a National Post article on the subject, says that 57% of Canadians think that Justin Trudeau is just completely on crack on that issue. But that's 50% of Canadians. If you polled parents, right, the number would be closer to probably closer to 90%. So Justin Trudeau has literally gone from calling people who wave the Canadian flag right-wing extremists to now labeling anybody that protested his draconian lockdown measures racist and right-wing extremists. Now he's labeling parents across this country who think that they should have a say in the mental health of their children dangerous right-wing extremists. Like he's the best thing that that the independence movement in Alberta has going for it. Given the ridiculous and extreme positions that he digs himself into to divert from, all of the scandals and all of the, the mismanagement and misgovernment that he's been involved in.
That's interesting that you mentioned how Trudeau uses those terms for people that disagree with him, because that's also right out of the Communist Manifesto. Right out of it is that you name call and label people, and you repeat and you repeat and you repeat until it becomes the truth. And that's what Trudeau is doing. He's repeating these lies that anyone who believes in freedom is a white supremacist, people that support the truckers are racist. And because it bounces around his state-sponsored media, it becomes the truth. And we got to get away from that. We have to start pursuing the actual truth and actual facts and getting back to a place where we can be prosperous again. And none of this BS, net zero at all costs. I say we need to be prosperous and we need to flourish as human beings at all costs. And if that means
but again, and I hope Danielle Smith does it sooner rather than later. But it's time to hang a giant mission accomplished banner on the whole net zero foolishness, right? I mean, we've all seen the math. We've all looked at, we've all done our research with regard to the amount of carbon that is absorbed by Canada's forests and grasslands, right? We're carbon negative 20 times over. Canada absorbs at least 20 times more CO2, and I'll bet you it's 30 or 40 times, because the math I saw was read was with regard to the carbon absorbed by our forests. And I mean, the math was that our forests absorb 13 times more CO2 than we emit. Well, I can tell you from having done the research with regard to the grasslands that I manage for my horses, that just 200 acres of grass will emit enough oxygen for 2,400 people a year and absorb a similar amount of carbon. So our grasslands actually absorb more carbon than our forests, and nobody's paying attention. We just need to declare carbon negativity tomorrow and move on from all of this foolishness. And stop pretending or allowing people to pretend like the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada did in the carbon tax reference, that somehow or other Canada's carbon emissions are an existential threat to Canadians. I mean, that type of ridiculous language needs to be completely done away with.
Absolutely. And the truth is actually the contrary. It's the opposite, that carbon dioxide is completely necessary. And if we reduce it below a certain threshold, people will starve. Plants won't grow as big. They won't grow. Fruit won't grow as big, and we won't be able to grow the food that we do now. So it's almost as if these policies are more anti-human than they are pro-environment.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, and again, that's why I'm such a strong advocate for Alberta independence. I mean, we need to get, and I've said this more than once, at various public forums that I've spoken at. Albertans do not deal very well with being governed by the stupid. And we saw that, in the last election when, Tyler Shandro and Jason Copping, lost their seats in Calgary. I mean, there's a lot of people that, literally stayed home and said, I can't go and vote for these people. They're morons. Not doing it. I'm staying home. Can't vote for stupid people. Not doing it. Unfortunately, Jason Nixon was kind of at the other end of the spectrum because I think rural Alberta, and I think I've spoken about this before, collectively got together and said, we cannot let Rachel Notley win because we remembered what happened the last time. Yeah. So rural Alberta, held their noses and went out and voted for, for Jason Nixon. But let's not think for a minute that that's because, Jason Nixon didn't deserve to be thrown out on his ass.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I have a question for you. How would an independent Alberta deal with issues like forest fires and forest management better as a sovereign independent nation than as a subject to the federal government in Canada? How could we do that? What would change?
Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of lessons that come out of this forest fire season, and I'm sure one of them is going to be that, the people that light forest fires, should be locked up for 20 years. I mean, that idiotic woman in Lakeland, County that, last year pled, the charges of 32 forest fires down to 4 counts of mischief and was released on probation. Well, I mean, this year, I hope with the 31 fires that she lit and the charges that are pending against her, that the Crown seeks to lock her up for 20 years. So we need to start finding, when we catch people that are running around lighting these fires, that we treat them like the serious criminals that they are and lock them up, for years so that they can't do it again. And certainly, as deterrence and as a lesson to others. And on top of it, I mean, we should be looking at charging them under whatever statutes also allow us to levy the largest possible fines against them and seize all their property. To compensate the people whose homes get burnt down and their livelihoods are destroyed. I mean, people need to understand that there need to be serious consequences for people that deliberately light our forests on fire for any reason.
So would an independent Alberta afford us the opportunity to reform our judicial system to accomplish some of these goals?
Oh, absolutely. But again, as far as it goes, the big concern for me in terms of independence is, is the larger fiscal question, and getting out from under the boot of transfers, transfer payments and equalization payments. And, and think about the resources, that we could then afford in Alberta, with the $10 billion a year that we've been sending to Quebec. We could triple or quadruple, our fleet of water bombers, or we could enter into contracts to, but I mean, all of that can be done now, but more money always helps.
So another thing we could do is we could change some of our policies regarding our natural resources. For instance, with our forests, we could be free to manage our resources, manage our forests in a way that fits our region, right? So we could actually go in and we can thin out forests, we can take out dead stand, we can do the things that we need to do to protect fires from naturally occurring events, protect forests from natural occurring events like lightning strikes. We can do that. Right now, we have this bureaucratic mess that we have to try and wade through that the federal government puts on our lap as a province, and we have to pander to their BS climate policies to get anything done. Well, we could get away from that. We could manage our resources, which is something we're supposed to be allowed to do anyway. So there's a lot of things that we could do as an independent Alberta that we can't do right now. And I just, when you ask the question, well, what would an independent Alberta mean? How would that make things better? The answers are there's so many answers. The only way we're going to be able to inform Albertans about this is if we can continue to travel across the province and speak at these events and share the message of independence and prosperity through independence with Albertans. So to do that, we do need your support. If you like what you're hearing and you want to help, please get a membership. Go to www.albertaprosperityproject.com. Check it out. Go through the frequently asked questions. Send an email with your questions or whatever. Get a membership. That helps us continue to do this kind of thing. In addition, if you're in an area that has a APP chapter, organize some events. Let's start doing this stuff. Let's start getting this message out to Albertans, because that question before about what percentage of Albertans supports independence, it's probably 80%, but not until after they've heard the message. So we need your help to get out there and get that message to the people of Alberta. Otherwise, we're going to spend the next 50 years asking the same questions, doing the same thing over and over and over again, except it's not going to be us. It's going to be our kids. And I don't think our kids deserve that. I think they deserve better.
No, and I mean, that's really why I support APP and why I support this movement, is that, we all need to stand up for the sake of our children and, make sure that we have some really drastic changes to the manner in which, Alberta, is being governed. And we've got to get the federal government out of Alberta and, take control of our own destiny. It's, again, the amount of prosperity that could be created in this province with Alberta charting, an independent economic path, free from Trudeau's carbon taxes, free from, punitive federal taxation and the debt that Trudeau's created. I mean, everybody needs to remember that Alberta is the only province in this country that can leave Canada debt-free, given the amount of money that we paid into Confederation through transfer payments. So, once people see their taxes going up and what's going to happen, in the next 5 years as a result of the crippling $1.8 trillion debt that's been run up by Justin Trudeau over the last 8 years, people need to, really need to get their heads around the fact that, we need to protect Alberta from the mess that Trudeau's created with his drunken sailor spending.
Absolutely. And that number you mentioned there, Jeff, $1.8 trillion is such a big number. It almost doesn't mean anything. It's wrapped around the scale back to zero, because it's just, you can't even wrap your head around how much money that is. So I'm going to put it in a different perspective. I think that, now correct me if I'm wrong, but our individual share of the debt, the national debt here in Canada, every man, woman, and child in this country is something along the lines of $48,000, I believe. That's the last number I saw, but that's a lot of money. $48,000 you are on the hook for because of idiotic ideological policies that our federal government is imposing on us. We pay for that. This isn't something the government is doing and the government is paying for. The government is doing it, and it's affecting us. It's costing us money. And at the very least, we have to have that leverage so that we can make them stop. They have to stop. But this is not sustainable. Jeff, is it sustainable to have a country of 38 million people carrying a $1.8 trillion debt? Is that right?
That's the whole problem. I mean, they live in this magical fairy land where they have a magic money wand that they think that they can, wave in the air. And people, accuse, APP members of being right wing. I'm not the least bit right wing. I just happen to have studied economics when I was going to university and understand that to have, social programs and to be able to afford, to be able to help our friends and neighbors that are less fortunate than the rest of us and have fallen on hard times. In order to do that, we need to have a thriving economy. And it's pretty hard to have a thriving economy when the 1/3 of the people in the country that actually work and create wealth are being disincentivized to the degree that they are with crippling taxation because of wasteful government spending. Everybody needs to sort of get their head around the bizarre fact of current Trudeau's Canada, where we have basically 1/3 of the population doesn't work because they're either senior citizens or their children. 1/3 roughly works for the government. So even if they do pay taxes, they're not real tax dollars, because it's just the government giving money to bureaucrats out of real tax dollars, and then the bureaucrats giving some of it back. So there's literally a third of working Canadians support, this country. It's on the backs of the 1/3 of the country that doesn't work for a municipal, provincial, or federal government, that actually work in the real economy, that are paying for everything. And I mean, people need to internalize that. and understand that we have an opportunity to create an independent Alberta where bureaucracy is minimized, regulation is minimized, excessive taxation is minimized, and people are free to, to work and prosper, to feed their families and live a good life, as opposed to what's coming down the pike, where we're going to see increasing inflation, increasing interest rates as a result of all of this wasteful spending that we're dealing with. People's mortgage rates doubling and doubling and tripling on a going forward basis. Grocery prices doubling on a going forward basis. All of these things that home heating prices doubling on a going forward basis. All of which is just being brought about by these so-called green policies of Justin Trudeau's, which are really designed, to take money out of the hands of working people and put it into the hands of parasites.
And justified through eco-terrorists lighting our forests on fire and blaming our prosperity for it.
Oh, it's complete insanity, right? And I mean, when I talk about parasites, let's be really clear. I'm talking about the billionaire welfare recipients that meet together every year in Davos to come up with their latest get richer quicker scheme. It's like, oh, I know, like if we tell everybody they can't eat beef anymore and they got to eat bugs, we can then, get, make John Kerry's wife's family really rich because they have all kinds of food production and they can shift to bug paste. So let's all start investing in bug paste. Let's all start investing in in windmills. Let's start investing in car batteries, because then we can, get idiots like Justin Trudeau to go into people's pockets and give us their hard-earned money in subsidies, so that we can continue to build all of these things that make zero economic sense. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. I mean, we're dealing with this parasitic billionaire class that's completely anti-human and are really only in it for themselves.
Yep. I just got an interesting text from Dr. Modry, and I thought I should mention this. So in Alberta, we paid $700 billion to Ottawa since 1965. That means that for every person in Alberta, we paid $155,000. That's why Jeff says we're the only country that would leave Confederation without debt, because we have paid way more than our share of that debt over that period of time. Like these numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. $700 billion. What could this province have done with $700 billion? Do you think we'd have a homeless problem? You think we'd have a problem taking care of our veterans? You think we'd have a problem managing our forests? No, we wouldn't. We'd be able to do those things, no problem.
Well, let's keep in mind that's currently half of the the current national debt. So we're literally a tenth of the population of Canada. Yet Alberta has prepaid half of Canada's national debt. I mean, Alberta could leave Canada tomorrow, and Canada would owe us money. I mean, that's what people need to internalize, and I mean, we all need to get our heads around the fact that enough is enough, and and get our heads around the fact that we would be far better off, as an independent country than we would being governed by and mismanaged by people like Justin Trudeau. Another statistic that people need to be aware of is that Justin Trudeau in the last 8 years has run up more debt than all other Canadian prime ministers combined.
Come on.
So, no, that's a true story, and it's that's just a fact. I mean, like we all remember how hard and how long we all worked to pay off Trudeau Senior's debts and deficits. And we had Mulrooney getting the ball started, and then Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin coming in and continuing to work on paying down the debt, and that was followed up by the Harper government. I mean, there's literally 5 or 6 prime ministers in a row that were working to pay off the mess that Trudeau Senior created, and then along comes Skippy, along comes Junior, and it's like, oh yeah, you think that debt that my dad created was something? Hold my beer, right? I mean, literally has put this country into a hole so deep that we're never going to get out of it.
Who benefits to that? Who's the beneficiary to that kind of debt?
What's that?
Who's the beneficiary to that kind of debt? Who does that
Well,
benefit?
but again, it's all the Skippy's friends in the World Economic Forum Investment
Yep.
Club, right?
Yep.
You know,
Global banks.
I think I looked at the numbers, right? You know, COVID spending on CERB, you know, only amounted to, you can say this now, right? Only amounted to several $100 billion. So where did all this other debt come from? Right? Like, and even that, like, if you think about, the hundreds of billions of dollars that were spent on CERB, if they just put that money into our healthcare system and, started paying doctors more and nurses more and orderlies more and improving the quality of our healthcare and our hospitals and all the rest of it, and told everybody, hey, just keep going to work, and we're going to take, a couple $100 billion and build out, an emergency surge of Canadian health resources so that everybody can keep working, we would have been far better off. Than them pretending that locking people up in their homes and giving them money to buy, paddle boards and motorbikes and all of the stuff that CERB money was wasted on, which is, effectively what happened. Like, once again, let's kick the hardworking taxpayer in the teeth and take their money away to give it to people to piss away on recreational toys.
It's funny, they bribe people with their own money. They take our money and then they give it back to us and pretend that they're doing us a favor.
Oh my God, it's absolutely insane. I was talking to somebody, that worked for Revenue Canada, and they're saying, "Oh, we got a big award for what a great job we did rolling out the rebates and all of the lives and the families that we supported by getting money into their hands so quickly." And I pointed out to the individual, I said, "Wow," I said, but I suppose if you hadn't shut down their businesses and taken their jobs away, that they wouldn't have needed the money in the first place. So I'm not sure whether any thanks are required, right? I mean, that's the level of stupidity that we're dealing with.
Yeah, they pretend that the government pretends that they're helping us with these programs, but the reality is all they have to do is they have to get their fingers out of our lives, because we are more than capable. At least most of us are more than capable of working and taking care of ourselves. And if we don't have government taking 65% of our wealth, we have the ability to help our friends and neighbors. Like, that's something people ask me about Alberta independence all the time. Oh, well, why do you have such a problem helping Quebec? I don't have a problem helping Quebec. I have a problem with the federal government stealing our money and then pretending that they're virtuous for giving the money to other people.
Oh no, it's
for themselves.
I mean, Jason Kenney, going down on getting out his knee pad and going down on bended knee to Justin Trudeau to beg Justin Trudeau, to give us some of our money back.
Please, Dad.
Oh my goodness, we're suffering here and we need our money back and we need some money, whatever. And then Justin Trudeau gets to pretend that he's magnanimous and he gets to come in Alberta and announce that he's giving us $1 billion or $2 billion back from the $10 billion that they take away from us every year. Exactly. I mean, it's complete stupidity.
And people buy it up. And this is a problem. I'm going to bring it back to this every single time. This is why it's so important that we get some education out to the people of Alberta as to what these facts are, what the reality is of our situation, because there's no hope of fixing any problem until you realize you have one, right? So if you're an average everyday Joe or Jane Albertan and you have no idea any of these things are going on, you wouldn't even know that you should be pursuing a solution. And that's what we want to do here. That's what me and Jeff and the rest of the other folks at the Alberta Prosperity Project, that's what we want to do. We want to inform Albertans so that we can start to work towards a solution. And, there's a lot of people that say, well, it's too late. I don't believe it's ever too late to try. And really, what else can we do? We got to do something. And it starts.
Well, it's clear that the status quo isn't working for us. I mean, it's the old, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, and hoping for a different result, right? So, that's what, to a certain extent, what we're dealing with here. And that's why, I'm encouraged by, Danielle Smith passing the Sovereignty Act. I think she'll, understand sooner rather than later what the limitations are of that statute, and the fact that we need, much more proactive, legislation passed to get Ottawa out of Alberta, right? Like, and just, and like just start passing legislation. Occupy the field, property and civil rights, or, are, under Section 9213 of the BNA Act, are within the sole jurisdiction of the province. So let's start passing, human rights and civil rights legislation, that completely ousts the ability of, the federal government to seize people's firearms, to engage in regressive taxation. I mean, let's stop at, like sending references to the courts and asking the courts. Let's just start passing legislation, including an amendment to the Alberta Interpretation Act, telling the judges how it is, legislating the judges as to how they're supposed to interpret this legislation. Enough of this judge-made law on these issues, and it's time to oust oust the courts from the Alberta economy and property and civil rights in this province. The legislature should be our primary defense, not the courts.
I agree 100%. Now, there is a problem with that, though, Jeff, and we talked about this in a previous webinar. So you're saying that Alberta needs to start passing legislation that insulates and protects us from the federal government. I agree. We already have, there's a lot of people out there, they don't think the Constitution is a good document. I think it's pretty darn good. It lays out what our sovereign jurisdiction is, and if only the federal government would respect that, we would probably be okay, but they don't. So Danielle Smith passes some laws. She passes the Alberta Sovereignty Act, does these things to try and protect Alberta. Now, we talked about this in a previous webinar. What's happening is the federal government is using issues like climate change and health to usurp our sovereign jurisdiction within certain areas. For instance, Theresa Tam, this was the one I'm talking about, Jeff. She made the correlation between health and climate change. So climate change is the single most dangerous impact to our health. Well, climate and environment is a federal portfolio. So now if Theresa Tam has made this correlation to say that our health is impacted by climate change, all of the sudden that gives the federal government a mandate to interfere with our health, for instance, with a federal health ID. Same thing with climate. We are supposed to develop and extract our resources, but the federal government's responsible for climate. So they say, like the Supreme Court case, which Jason Kenney, he brought that reference case up. The Supreme Court said, yes, constitutionally, Alberta, you shouldn't be paying a carbon tax, but you're going to because climate change, right? So
I'll just jump in and back up. But I mean, that was a division of powers case, the carbon reference, right? Mm-hmm. So it goes up as a division of powers case. The Alberta Court of Appeal obviously ruled in favor of the provincial government on that issue. But then it gets to the Supreme Court, and even though it went up as a constitutional reference on the basis of division of powers, the Supreme Court, completely out of far left field, says, "Oh well, none of the lawyers, argued or put forward any evidence to show that climate, that this isn't an emergency, and that climate change isn't man-made, and because climate change is an existential threat to the world, we find it's an existential threat to Canada. Therefore, it's an emergency. Therefore, carbon taxes and any measure designed to fight climate is an emergency measure. Therefore, it should be within the jurisdiction of the federal government."
Yep.
So none of that was argued in the court below. There was never a trial on the issue of whether climate change, even climate change, whatever it is, whether it's man-made, whether it's just a function of how close we are to the sun at any particular time, whether or not anybody can even explain climate. I mean, I always say, if you can't explain to me, what caused the last ice age, don't talk to me about, weather being evidence of, man-made climate change, right? I think that Danielle Smith should hire litigators and should sue Justin Trudeau for fraud or negligence or something and litigate this issue in court. The issue of whether or not climate change is man-made, or, the fraud comes in with whether or not any of the measures that he's imposing on Canadians, carbon tax or otherwise, will do anything to affect global climate. There's no proof whatsoever that doubling an Albertan's natural gas bill will do anything to affect the weather. And I've written about this before, and it's, to my way of thinking, what Trudeau's doing is no different than, the Aztec priests at a high altar cutting out somebody's heart because they want to make it rain. It's the same idea that we're going to literally sacrifice working men and women on the altar of climate change, hoping we're going to change the weather. It's absolute insanity. But, somehow or other, we've got this left-wing Supreme Court that's been sucked in, to going along with this foolishness.
Yeah. And then we have the savior of Alberta, parachuted in from Ottawa, Jason Kenney, saying he's going to fix this. He's going to end the carbon tax because he's going to stand up for Albertans. And that was all an illusion. To hear, and actually it was the premier that told me this, I didn't know until like last year, to hear that neither side disputed the facts of climate change, so the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government, blew my mind. I thought that Alberta was, we were standing up for truth, but really the truth never made its way into the courtroom.
No, because it was the way the case went up. It went up as it basically went up as a division of powers reference case, and there wasn't a trial on any of these issues. It wasn't like we had a year's worth of of scientists on both sides of the issue laying it out in front of a judge who then would decide, whether or not climate change is man-made or not. The thing gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court just, presumes on the basis of global hysteria, promoted, by an autistic high school dropout, by the name of Greta Thunberg, that somehow or other the world is in peril, because things are a little warm. Right? Nobody looked at the 10,000-year global temperature average. Nobody looked at the 5,000-year average. Nobody considered the fact that, we're currently, that the average global temperatures right now are at a 10,000-year low, right? None of that was considered, right, in the context of all of this dystopian, apocalyptic, the world is going to end nonsense that we've been hearing, right? I think Greta Thunberg said 5 years ago that the world was going to end in 5 years and all humanity would be exterminated from the planet because of climate change. Well,
and then followed with, how dare you? How dare you?
Oh yeah, we have children with mental defects being allowed to go into the United Nations and scream and yell at world leaders as if it means anything. And again, it was the same thing. I mean, quite frankly, I'll bring it back to the original topic. Skippy screaming at Pierre Poilievre last week in the House of Commons about forest fires being caused by climate change, right? When when it's looking more and more like, it's a deliberate effort to, have forest fires burn out of control by strategically placed arson, right? It's just complete insanity. It's this hysterical nonsense that makes no sense whatsoever, and that's the way we're being governed. It's, I just kind of wonder when people in this country are going to wake up.
I've been fortunate to have been working mostly outside for the last 25 years, 23 of them in this province. And I remember when I moved here, I was roughnecking on a service rig down by Tabor, and the thermometer in the doghouse said 42.5. 42.5 in 2000. That was 23 years ago. And since then, I haven't seen days that hot. I've worked outside every year except for the last few, and still I work outside a little bit. Never seen it that hot. And this, I have people still online saying the earth is on fire because Greta Thunberg says so. The earth is on fire because John Kerry and Al Gore say so. But the facts don't support the hysteria. And until we start to cut through that hysteria with real truth and real facts, I think that echo chamber of lies is gonna take us to a place where we really don't want to be. I mean, if the world is getting warmer, I'm sorry, but I want energy so that we can manage it. I want to be able to run irrigation pumps. I want to be able to have air conditioning. I want to be able to manage the climate that I'm in. Right? If we have droughts and we can't use some sort of energy to move water around this province, what's going to happen? Well, people will die. If it gets really, really cold, they'll freeze to death, and we can't grow food. We have to be able to manage these things. And it's important that the truth gets out there. So we really went all over the map from forest fires. Hey?
I think there's only so much you can say about the fact that it's that it's a clear fact that a big part of our forest fire season this year, the biggest contributor to out of control forest fires was a deliberate diversion of forestry resources by arsonists, right? But it's all interrelated. It's the same people that are screaming that forest fires are caused by climate change. Are the same ones that say that again are already planning the next climate lockdowns, right? Like, and how much easier is it going to be to lock people down when they're in 15-minute cities monitored by cameras every time they turn around? They're already putting the infrastructure in place. I mean, the federal government is literally giving tens of millions of dollars to municipalities to put in place, this so-called 15-minute city infrastructure, right? Yeah. So how much easier is it going to be to lock people down when Theresa Tam and all of the idiots around her declare, a climate change or a health emergency when they claim that they need to fight ableism, heteronormativity, and capitalism, and they're going to lock down everybody that's able-bodied, heteronormative, and working in an actual job in a capitalist economy, as opposed to working for the government. They're going to lock us all down, monitored by cameras, and that's all going to be done in the name of public health again. I mean, what we went through in COVID, I don't think that this is a ridiculous suggestion.
If all of those groups are going to be locked down and the rest are going to be left to run things and govern, that's going to be quite the motley crew, keeping things going.
Well, no, again, it's this whole, I honestly believe that it's just this attempt to turn Canada into Venezuela. And it's, it's this idea that, you destroy the Canadian economy, then, rapid inflation and the rest of it, it allows the billionaire club from the World Economic Forum to come in and China, and to come into Canada and buy up our resources at pennies on the dollar. I mean, I really think that there's a longer term plan here, that literally involves stripping Canada of its national wealth and prosperity, for the benefit of the investment club in Davos.
Yep, this is a much bigger.
There's no doubt about it in my mind.
This is a much bigger issue than just equalization or carbon tax or any of those things. This is this might be a bold statement, but this is an existential threat. What's happening is it's a threat to our way of life in this country. And while I believe in an independent Alberta, part of the reason I believe in that so strongly is because that's also the only way to save the rest of Canada from what's coming. If you consider what happened over the lockdowns, it only took a few people to stand up and speak out and use their voices and stand their ground to encourage others to do so. And that's what Alberta needs to do. Canada's going down the drain just like Venezuela was. I mean, we're on the same trajectory. We're doing the same things, the same anti-human policies. And if somebody doesn't stand up and say no, enough is enough, and set the example for the rest of the people in this country, nobody will. And we're all going down the toilet together. So Alberta, you have a responsibility to the rest of Canada, if you believe in the people here, to actually stand up and do something. So please, by now, get your membership and help us get to work doing these things.
I really believe that we're at a tipping point, and that Alberta, has the ability to stand up and change the entire World Economic Forum agenda that's been stuffed down everyone's throat. So, so again, I encourage everybody to, check out APP, join. Your membership really means something. The more members we have, the more people in government are forced to take our policy ideas seriously. The more of us there are, the more influence we have, to make Alberta a better place to live. So I'd like to thank everybody tonight who's joined us and who listened in. And it's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to reach out and speak to people through this forum. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. It's the folks of Alberta that are going to make this happen, and we definitely can do it together. And I think it's going to be a fun ride while we're doing it. So.
Well, and Chris, I guess we should probably remind everybody about the get together on this coming Saturday.
Oh yes, yep. So the event in Bowden, Alberta, the APP membership meeting, is sold out, completely 100% sold out. So that is a big woohoo, right on, we did it. But there still are virtual tickets available. So the virtual tickets, I believe, are $10. And if you scan that handy dandy QR code there, no, this isn't to show your vaccination status so you can get in the door. This is just so you can get to the website so that you can buy a virtual ticket and attend. I highly recommend it. If you have questions about what's going on with the Alberta Prosperity Project, if you have concerns, if maybe you were a member and you're not now and you're considering getting your membership, or even if you're not considering getting your membership, please spend the $10. It's 4 cups of coffee, watch the event, and you're going to get some answers to your questions. You're going to see some big news, you're going to see some big plans, and you're going to very likely realize that what the Alberta Prosperity Project is trying to do is something that's never been done before, and it is the only solution that can bring together a solution to fix all of the problems that we're having in this province and potentially in this country. So get your tickets, and if you're going to be there in person, we're really looking forward to seeing you there. And thank you for helping us make it a successful event.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much, Chris. It was a pleasure being here tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. And I will catch you on the flip side.
Okay, you bet. Next time.
Okay.
All right. Over now.